Ahsoka walked in, the doors hissing and sliding open as she neared the command center. It was in a new location from before, a similar set of rooms but deeper inside of a different Axumite spire, defended from all angles so as to prevent a repetition of what had happened in the last command center. The Togrutan warrior felt a shiver course down her spine from her neck to her tailbone. She had missed that assault by mere minutes, having departed just prior to the Imperial attack. The strange, stretched face of the rebel who had been walking into that place flashed before her eyes, remembering him, and knowing that she was among the last beings to see him alive. But she shook the thoughts out of her head with a slight waggle of her leku. These were hardly the first morbid thoughts of that nature she had been subject to that day, and from the sound of it, her gloomy self-reflection would have to wait. After all, she had just entered the room, and had not said a word, and already people were yelling.
Then what was the point of this entire assault?
Yelled the voice of a woman, Jedi Master Elena Zan, Ahsoka realized.
We have to cut our losses. The Imperials have proved to be too much trouble. We cannot continue to play this game by their rules.
Snapped back the thunder of Master Mace Windu's response. Ahsoka turned a bend in the last short corridor and entered the space of the command room properly, seeing them both standing near the center of the room, the Jedi, clones, and other command staff standing back and around them.
So they all died for nothing. So we went with your plan to assault their temple for nothing? No,
spoke the Jedi woman opposite Mace Windu, her fists clenched, her hair wrapped in a tight bun, her face smeared with soot, ash, and blood. Her robes were tatters, drifting in her wake, her eyes fierce and expression creasing as she crossed her arms. However, even her appearance was pale in comparison to the fearsome figure cut by Mace Windu. His robes were burnt and torn, his muscular flesh visible in multiple places, and very few of those spots were unmarred by burns, cuts, or deep, dark bruises. His left arm was missing, his robe cut and folded over the stump, which halted the progress of his limb halfway down his forearm. But nowhere was his grim nature more clearly painted than upon his face and the expression which he cast over it. Small white burn patches framed an emotional tapestry that Ahsoka had never seen on the Master's face before, each hateful wrinkle representing a single brushstroke which etched out the furious features of the fallen Master. One of his eyes was white, hollow and sightless, the flesh around it inflamed, reddened, and burned. His other eye, however, was the more fearsome, a fiery sphere, like the eye of a red and yellow sun, held in a glower which was all too obviously able to see the subject of his current frustration. Despite his vicious demeanor, or perhaps because of it, Master Zahn did not back down an inch from his challenging presence.
I am in command here.
Windu hissed through clenched teeth.
And I am giving you a direct order.
Elena made a dismissive sound and laughed derisively in his face.
Do you really still believe that? After what your last assault cost us? After ordering Coleman and Oppo into those massacres? After what you did to Master Obi-Wan Kenobi? Do you have any idea how many losses the entire Order just took because of your mistakes?
The female Jedi Battle Master railed, jutting her chin towards him as though to point with it.
And that is why I'm not going to repeat those mistakes. The temple assault has been nothing but failure since the beginning. We should have always planned to do this from the start.
Countered the one-armed Jedi Master. Ahsoka sidled up to one of the clones in the room silently, eyes on the hostile display before her.
Hey, Sando.
Ahsoka whispered to the clone.
What's going on? What are they arguing about?
She asked.
Got word from the fleet above us. Good news and bad news.
The clone whispered back, himself also watching the debate before them with no small interest.
Good news is the Imperials have been driven out of the system. Bad news is they have to leave in a few minutes to head back to Coruscant. Apparently another Imperial fleet showed up there.
Sando explained.
What? Coruscant?
Ahsoka said, barely able to keep her voice down. Sando nodded.
Half the Armada has already gone back. The other half will follow soon. Mace wants to take most of the Jedi back with them, but not before.
Sando continued, before trailing off.
What? Not before what?
Ahsoka pressed urgently, but silently.
Not before using what's left of our ships to bombard the Imperial Temple from orbit. He wants to reduce their whole structure to a clean hole in Azure City, leading all the way down to the true surface.
Ahsoka felt like she had just been slapped, almost rocking back on her heels at the news. Meanwhile, the debate raged, Master Ilana uncrossing her arms and pointing a demonizing finger at Windu.
Nothing but failure! Shakti succeeded in assassinating their commanders. Ayla fought and bled her forces to reach this cursed temple. And Ahsoka Tano ensured the destruction of their main force. The only person failing here is you, Master Windu.
She accused. Windu grit his teeth so tightly, Ahsoka could almost hear the enamel straining against itself, his right hand opening into a claw at his side.
Enough.
He growled.
Stand down, Elena. I won't say it again.
She raised an eyebrow at him, her stance spreading somewhat, her hands balling into fists.
Or what? You'll strike me with the lightsaber you're reaching for, Mace?
She asked, rage constricting her throat, her own eyes fierce as flames as she glared at him.
Do I need to remind you that you left it and your honor as a Jedi buried in the chest of an Imperial officer?
Ilana continued, stepping towards Windu. Mace's face twitched, as though he had just realized what he was doing, but he was too far gone to backtrack now. The fingers on his remaining hand curled, forming a fist of his own in response to her words, and Ilana returned the gesture with a fierce, joyless grin, raising her own fists in response.
Or should I remind you why they call me Iron Hand instead? I appreciate Master Kenobi, but I won't go down as easily as he did if you try it, Mace.
The Battlemaster promised her superior, voice cold as forged steel left in the snow. Mace did not flinch.
We are destroying the temple,
he stated, reflecting her frigid tone back to her. In response, several clones and Jedi behind Mace stepped forward, handling but not raising their weapons, making clear where they sided.
We are taking the temple,
she retorted, a challenge obvious in every syllable. As with Mace, an even larger group of clones and Jedi approached from behind Ilana, mirroring the gesture of their counterparts, greater in number but not by a huge amount. Ahsoka felt a shrill cold filling her veins as she continued to bear witness to this internal collapse. During the dawning rays of Azure City's morning, the Jedi had stood united and together like rarely before. Now, they seemed moments from trading blows with one another. And, what was worse, Ahsoka could not for the life of her think of how she could possibly talk either side down. As she puzzled her brain over what she could do to interfere before it was too late, another two figures walked past her and came to stand between the two contending Jedi, Masters Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jocasta Nu.
Enough,
said the elderly master, her eyes narrow as she stood in such a way that she could look back and forth between the two. Obi-Wan taking a position opposite her, himself able to only stare at one of them comfortably, thanks to the thick brace around his neck. Unsurprisingly, his pristine gray-blue eyes locked onto the half-fiery, half-blind spheres of Mace Windu.
Master Windu, this has gone far enough,
he said, voice stern, yet not unkind.
Indeed. You two are showing precisely why the Imperials have been extracting such a cost from us.
Jocasta added in his wake.
But he's...
Began Master Ilana, but Jocasta forestalled her with a raised finger.
We are not blind to the folly of what Master Windu is suggesting. But the way you are confronting him is not helping anyone. Neither he nor you come to a solution.
The chief librarian of the Jedi Order counseled. Mace was the one to respond, not Ilana.
Folly?
He spat, incredulous.
The only folly was in not planning to do this from the start. How many Jedi are these Imperials worth?
Windu almost roared, fist clenched.
Not one,
said Jocasta, slowly turning to eye him.
So it is unforgivable to do their work for them. Something you would be doing if you chose to fight Master Zime. Something that Depa Billaba has already done in dealing a mortal blow to departed Master T'Pau.
She finished. Mace's face filled with fury, and he took a daunting step in Jocasta's direction, soot stirring on the floor as the Force swirled around him in response to his intense emotions. But he came up short, as a blue blade of light ignited across his vision, level with his own eyes. Mace swept his single-seeing eye towards the man holding the saber, his heated fury meeting with Obi-Wan's cold determination. He said nothing, holding his saber out between Mace and Jocasta, his line in the sand drawn and burning.
You have lost control,
said Master Nu, her eyes just as cold as Obi-Wan's.
You should return to Coruscant. Speak with Master Yoda, and give no more orders until then.
She all but ordered. Mace's teeth clenched so hard, Ahsoka was half sure they would shatter. The room trembled somewhat, hollow discs rattling on tabletops as Mace's functioning eye burned, and his face further creased. A drop of sweat slid down Obi-Wan's head, but his expression remained firm, his knees bending somewhat in preparation. Ahsoka watched on, eyes bulging as time began to slow, in sync with the adrenaline hitting her blood. Before she knew it, her saber was in her hand, the short bar of blue light rising slowly from the hilt. She was only a fraction of a second ahead of every other Jedi in the room, many of their eyes glowing like distant bonfires within their skulls. She held her breath, eyes swiveling in her skull as the clones began to sluggishly raise their guns to aim, time crawling beneath the weight of the moment. As the room was lit in multicolored light, Ahsoka watched as Mace's burning eye swept around, seeing the divide, seeing that he did not stand alone. His lips twitched, fist clenching more tightly, air distorting around it.
Please, don't do it.
Ahsoka prayed in her mind, heart hammering in her chest. Mace's eye widened, and the fire within it dimmed. He released his clenched fist, breathing in through his nose and closing his eyes, breathing heavily out through his mouth. As he did, a great deal of the tension seemed to leave him, and though he was still scowling when he opened his eyes, his seeing eye was no longer the hateful star it had been before. He gave Jocasta a curt nod past the lightsaber which stood between them, and turned, his tattered robes splaying in the air with the speed of the movement.
With me,
he growled, departing and heading towards the nearby Acclamator assault ships, nearly half the Jedi following shortly after. As they departed, both Ahsoka and Obi-Wan gave identical, slow releases of breath, sighing silently as they straightened and deactivated their sabers. The Jedi who remained followed suit.
That was a fair amount more tense than I would have hoped.
said Master Obi-Wan with a faint smile.
Yes, it was. But just navigating that situation didn't solve our problem.
Elena groaned in his wake.
I may not agree with his nonsense solution, but Master Windu was right about one thing. These Imperials have a nasty habit of bleeding us horrifically whenever we attack them. And I don't expect that they will change that willingly. If we just invade the temple, I half expect them to blow it up with us inside. Which, in fairness, is an even worse outcome than bombing it from orbit.
The iron hand of the Jedi said, raising her famous fists and facing them palms up as she shrugged.
Then maybe we don't attack,
said Obi-Wan.
We have superiority over them in most ways. We can lock them down, siege them, starve them out.
He offered.
That only gives them time to try something desperate. We need to neutralize them more effectively before they can try another dangerous plan.
Jocasta countered with a shake of her head.
Ahem,
Said a voice, turning the heads of the masters to face Ahsoka as she made herself known.
I think I may have just the alternative to try.
She proposed, a sly smile cutting her features as Captain Rex entered the command base from behind her.
It's almost time,
Spoke the voice of Aloysius Cinder. Lazarus stood behind the entry pillar, metal augmentations squealing as he nodded. The edifice's shadow slanted against the setting sun and over the two men.
Understood. Begin. Remember to stay indirect, Cinder. Come in from
the saint began to say, halting as Cinder raised an armored hand.
With respect, Your Holiness. I know what I'm about.
Aloysius added, though not harshly.
You are not alone in this.
The man continued, his stern face hidden behind the glare of his fully encompassing helmet. The hard lines which formed Lazarus's wounded, scowling face softened somewhat, just enough for the former soldier to slide a tight grin over his teeth.
Of course,
he said, extending out his hand towards the scion.
Go with he who lights the way,
intoned the saint. Cinder looked down at Lazarus's extended hand for a moment, red lensed eyes glowing in the darkness before looking back up at the saint. His expression was inscrutable as he reached out and grabbed Lazarus's forearm, returning the gesture.
The Emperor protects,
said the Tempestor Prime, gripping Lazarus's flesh and blood arm tightly in his hand, and Lazarus doing the same. They split then without another word, turning away from each other simultaneously and heading in opposite directions. Like shadows, Cinder's command squad of scions seemed to materialize around him, emerging and falling into line as he swiftly and silently made his way towards the hidden Taurox transports. Stepping out from another one of the entry pillars, upon which she had been leaning, was Leandra, falling into a stride beside Lazarus as he moved past her. As she did, the canoness took up a banner which she held in her left hand. Tall and billowing, it depicted the symbol of her order, a veiled bride standing beside an empty throne upon a background of red. The bride was winged and held a sword before the throne, which was golden and raised. Above and below her, written in gold, were the words of Leandra's order. In her other hand, she held a flaming mace, a thing which looked almost more like a metal torch than a weapon. While she leaned the banner against her shoulder, she did no such thing with the blazing weapon she gripped in her right gauntlet. She held it away from Lazarus, intentionally walking so that the heat from it would not scald him as they strode towards the others.
What was that?
Leandra asked, tilting her head.
Call it vengeance insurance,
Lazarus said, prompting a vicious smile to slowly grow over the battle sister's face. But the saint did not have much time to see it as he came to stand before the rest of his impromptu command squad.
We are departing soon,
he said, Though halfway through the sentence, he realized he should probably give Cinder a little more time to get ahead of them.
Do you remember your roles in this?
He asked them.
Yes, Holiness.
Said Commissar Jane Leros.
I am representing the Astra Militarum in this.
She reported, standing straight-backed. She then seemed to pause before snapping a glare over at Farnes, who jumped and stumbled to salute.
And I am acting as the Commissar Colonel's guard, and once we retrieve the prisoners, I will take command of their care and protection.
The young man stated with a stiff salute that he held, even as the next person began to speak.
I am representing the Adeptus Mechanicus interest at this meeting,
reported Aurora's synthetic voice as she stood nearby, leaning on her axe as servo skulls orbited her in the air. I am her guard, 1313 stated simply, standing with his remaining arm stiff at his side, back straight, hand filled with the now familiar grip of his hot-shot las pistol. Obviously, I'm the Inquisition. Insofar as this ceasefire is concerned, said the deep rasp of Samael, a little muffled by the low stick in his mouth.
And I'm Hecate!
Cheerfully chirped his odd guardian, waving her hand frantically at St. Lazarus as she did, something the Inquisitors seemed to ignore completely.
Good. I don't believe the Republic will have the grounds to demand that any of you leave. Not with those roles and the rules as written in the message we received.
Lazarus began to say, though he paused when he noticed Farnes raise his hand stiffly.
Yes, what is it, soldier? Oh, and at ease.
Lazarus said, allowing Farnes to relax from his stiff posture somewhat, though he remained quite rigid as he felt Commissar Leros drilling holes into the side of his head with the raw pressure of her glaring eyes.
What, role are you fulfilling, sir? In the meeting, I mean.
Farnes asked and then clarified.
What I mean to say is that, if you don't have a role...
The guardsman continued.
Then they may ask that I and Leandra leave.
Lazarus concluded with a nod of his head, resting his flesh-and-blood hand on his chin.
That is not a concern,
assured Leandra, stepping forward then, hefting her standard and placing it down, but against the ground beside St. Lazarus and before the rest of the group.
He is an imperial saint. By my banner and authority as canoness of this basilica, I hereby bestow the authority of the faith upon him.
She declared to them, eyes meeting with Samael's, who, in turn, nodded subtly. She then faced Lazarus.
Will you represent the ecclesiarchy, St. Lazarus? Will you speak for the Emperor's faith?
She asked. Lazarus felt a sense of dizzy lightheadedness building up at the back of his skull, but he nodded nonetheless, reaching forward and grasping the banner.
As is my duty.
He managed to say past the whirl of intense, existential emotions the moment had poured into him. Leandra nodded her head and released the standard, allowing Lazarus to heft it with old practice onto his own shoulder. He firmed his expression, gathering his strength to bear this reasserted responsibility, and met his eyes to those of the canoness. She smiled in return, and he took no small amount of strength from that, turning to face the others once more.
Gather whatever you need if you have not already. Then, we march.
Ahsoka.
Obi-Wan groaned, leaning over in his seated position and stiffly rubbing his eyes with 2 fingers, his neck confined in the brace he wore and forcing his chin up somewhat.
I know,
she muttered miserably.
I know Anakin encouraged you to improvise, but this is...
he said, placing the datapad with her terms down on the table before him.
I know,
she said again, crossing her arms.
Half the prisoners. You realize if this doesn't work, and it most likely won't, you are handing the few hundred remaining Imperials several thousands of new...
The Jedi began to go on, leaning back, but being cut off by his second pupil.
Look, I know!
She blurted, fists clenched.
But it needed to be this way.
Ahsoka insisted, placing a hand down on the table.
She's probably right,
said Elena, chewing the bottom of her lip as she did.
You agree with this?
Obi-Wan Kenobi asked, gesturing at the datapad with raised eyebrows.
I didn't say that.
Elena snapped back.
I mean that she's right about it being the only way to get them to come to the table.
The Jedi Master explained to her skeptical contemporary.
They'd need a large, guaranteed bribe to agree to something like this. The imps have been nothing if not uncompromising up until now, but frankly, we might as well give them all the prisoners. Let them worry about feeding and equipping them.
The Iron Hand of the Jedi Order explained.
No, we can't do that. Not if we seriously attempt to achieve anything,
said Obi-Wan, wincing as he instinctively tried to shake his head.
We need the rest of the prisoners to bargain with,
he elaborated.
Not only that,
Ahsoka chimed in.
But they wouldn't trust it. They expect us to betray them, I'm sure. This is enough for them to consider it, but not so much that they think it must be a trap. All of them, however, that would probably be too much to believe.
The young warrior explained.
And yet,
answered an old, wizened voice.
If they expect betrayal, they are likely to attempt it first. We leave ourselves terribly exposed by approaching them in this way and relying on them to keep their deal. It is more likely, I think, that they will attempt to destroy us once they retrieve their prisoners.
Advised Master Jocasta Nu.
It would be suicide if they did.
Ahsoka pointed out, but the older Jedi only nodded.
Even so,
said the chief librarian.
Master Nu has a point,
Elena said grimly, leaning over the table with one hand and gesturing towards the elder master with the other.
The chances that they have some kind of countertrap ready, or that they will simply try to attack and kill us, are too high to ignore.
The combat master elaborated.
But we can't show up outside of the bounds of the deal. They'll use it as an excuse to run away, or worse, start another fight.
Ahsoka interjected, leaning forward, her hands on the table before her and between them.
Calm down, Ahsoka,
said Obi-Wan, rubbing his bearded chin as he considered the issue.
You mentioned before that they are not liable to trust us if the deal is too good, right?
The master continued. Ahsoka nodded in response, biting her lip as she did.
We may be able to use that then,
Obi-Wan concluded.
How?
Asked Elena.
We'll have Captain Cody stand by some distance from us with a regiment of forces, more than enough to bowl over what's left of the Imperials.
Explained the Soresu master.
Won't that just scare them off?
Ahsoka asked, but Obi-Wan nodded.
Despite the atrocity we have seen them inflict on others, these Imperials care about each other. At least some do.
He explained, remembering in his mind the Inquisitor, his assassin, the female knight, and her maimed yet stalwart commander.
They won't abandon the prisoners of war we have lightly. So if we place Cody and his forces a certain distance away,
Obi-Wan said, letting the words hang in the air.
Like, far enough away that the Imperials could feasibly run away from the meeting point and escape.
Ahsoka continued the line of thought.
Then it would be enough to show them that we are ready for treachery, but not enough to make them believe we have committed to it ourselves.
Jocasta finished, nodding her head.
It is a good plan,
she affirmed a moment later.
Almost a good plan.
Elena added in, raising Obi-Wan's eyebrows in the process.
They could always use the time they need to run away to suicidally attempt to kill us instead.
Elena elaborated. Ahsoka frowned, but before she could speak, her master's former master interjected.
You are not wrong, and we would be in a rather bad situation if that happened. But only if Cody's forces were the only ones waiting in the wings.
Master Kenobi said.
But they will only be the visible ones, Master Elena, not the only ones.
He added.
What do you have in mind?
Asked Elena, a devious expression sliding over her face. Obi-Wan returned her smile.
ARC Troopers,
was his answer.
Alpha ARC Troopers.
They had gathered some distance away from the meeting point with the Imperials, Ahsoka having advised that it was probably best to arrive at around the same time, and not early. Obi-Wan had seconded the recommendation, and now, here they were, waiting. Ahsoka had her eyes fixed on a datapad, streaming a video feed through it and watching it intently. On the screen before her was the smoking, war-torn streets of Azure City, avenues of bent and broken metal languishing silently under columns of smoke which drifted this way and that. When clear of those black pillars of ash, Ahsoka would have been able to see straight through, all the way to the walls of the Imperial Temple. Now, however, she would need to command the probe droid she was seeing through to deploy more than its baseline sight scopes to pierce this veil, though what she could see now would still be enough to warn her of their approach.
Anything?
Asked Rex, the clone standing near to her side, carefully checking and examining his new Imperial death laser. The weapon had a light blue and white coating of paint that someone had managed to get an astromech droid to apply hastily, giving it a Republic emblem on the stock of the weapon as well. He seemed to be trying to figure out how to properly clean it, and was carefully disassembling the weapon while referencing a small Imperial handbook, tapping his helmet from time to time to reload the translation program he was using to read it.
Not yet.
Ahsoka answered without looking away.
Maybe it's a trap.
He offered, and Ahsoka frowned, still not moving her head.
If it is, then we won't fall into it easily.
She muttered, sliding her finger over the datapad and directing the probe droid to show her more of its 360-degree view.
Maybe, but still, I wonder what the outcome will be if they really...
Rex began to say before cutting himself off.
Oh, Scrog.
He cursed, visor orienting towards a target in the distance.
What?
Asked Ahsoka, looking up and following the orientation of Rex's helmed head to the path of an approaching clone. The clone was notable right away for two distinct features: the blue markings on his helmet and armor, and his bulky, somewhat larger size, something that stuck out distinctively on a clone trooper. Ahsoka quirked her eyebrow stripes and looked back towards Rex, unable to miss how similar the style of their armors were and how close their blue patterns seemed to match each other.
Brother of yours?
Ahsoka asked, and Rex nodded, slowly.
Older brother, way older.
He added, seeming almost as tense as he would confronting an approaching enemy.
Way older? How can he be way older?
She asked, but Rex initially only shook his head.
He's a prototype,
he said after a moment, straightening somewhat as it became clear that this clone was heading directly towards them, him in particular.
Well, what's his name?
Ahsoka asked, putting the datapad down.
His designation is A-17.
Rex answered.
But Anakin named him Alpha.
He finished, presenting a crisp salute and making Ahsoka blink in surprise. The clone said nothing as he strode up, getting almost right into Rex's face before he stopped. Rex did not budge or flinch. A tense moment passed where Ahsoka felt she should say something, but had no idea what to say.
At least you still remember how to salute, even if we are the same rank now.
The clone rasped.
Experience outranks everything. You helped teach me that, and I don't forget lessons,
said Rex, only breaking his salute when Alpha returned the statement with a very slight nod, the chin of his helmet dipping only minutely.
Still, I didn't think experience could buy you out of death. I thought you went missing, along with the body of Asajj Ventress,
Rex added as he returned to his at-ease posture.
I made it back a few months ago. Been walking around for weeks now, no thanks to Grievous and his 4 fracking lightsabers.
Alpha explained.
Exactly why I'm surprised you made it back at all. What happened to your shuttle?
Asked Rex, to which the older clone sighed through his nose.
Asajj Ventress happened. Turns out she was not as dead as the General thought. She woke up, hijacked the ship, and...
He then shook his head.
It's a long story, Rex.
Alpha concluded.
A long story that ends with you ending Ventress for good, right?
Rex asked, but the clone shook his head.
We came to an understanding. She isn't a SEP anymore, not a priority target. Besides, I had a few more pressing concerns, we all did. But like I said, it's a long story, and not one I'm authorized to tell right now, in any case.
Rex nodded his head somberly then.
Well, whatever the case may be, it's good to see you back and on our side, now maybe more than ever.
Ahsoka's clone captain said. Alpha nodded, but before he could add anything to that statement, he was addressed by someone else. His attention pulled to them instead.
Hi.
Ahsoka interjected, stepping such that Rex moved back so that she could stand before Alpha. She extended her hand, an unsure expression on her face as she scrutinized him.
I'm Ahsoka Tano.
She went on.
Anakin's former Padawan. I've heard a little about you. I understand that you used to work under my master's command before I joined his team.
Again, the clone did not deign to answer right away, his helmet moving steadily as he scanned her up and down.
Negative.
He said a moment later, not taking her extended hand.
I wasn't Anakin's soldier. I was his babysitter. General Kenobi was my commander, even if most of his commands were to follow his Padawan around and keep him alive.
Alpha explained.
I see the cycle is repeating again.
He added, his tone almost sour as he looked between Ahsoka and Rex. Ahsoka withdrew her hand and crossed her arms.
Well, you're a rude clone,
Ahsoka said in response.
I'm also a correct one.
Alpha added without missing a beat.
This plan is suicidal, unwarranted, and just plain stupid.
He said flatly. Ahsoka raised a single white eyebrow, her expression conveying a stale, unimpressed appearance.
Gee, thanks for that tactical insight,
she retorted.
If you want to thank me, then call this off,
was his quick response.
And do what? Bomb them from orbit like Master Windu wanted to?
The former Jedi asked, exasperation filtering into her voice.
No, that's wasteful, and it fails our mission,
he said to Ahsoka's surprise.
The mission was to capture the Basilica. We should assemble several teams of commandos and arcs, wait until nightfall, and breach the Basilica from the lower level. We'll prime some canisters with the blue shadow virus and—
The blue shadow virus?
Ahsoka exclaimed, cutting him off.
We are in the middle of Axum. Even if a little bit leaks to the greater population, the civilian losses will be—
She began to retort, only to be cut off herself.
Manageable. We can disperse vaccines onto the planet once we have confirmed that Basilica is secure and ours. This will lead to the least amount of risks, losses, and maximize the amount of gains we can make for the Republic.
Alpha pressed, though Ahsoka did not seem convinced.
I'm not going to do that. If this works, then maybe there won't need to be any more fighting at all,
Ahsoka said.
With all due respect, you will only be incentivizing a determined enemy to take advantage of us in the future. This war is inevitable. Nothing that happens here will stop it.
Alpha retorted.
And with all due respect to you, sir, that is not your call to make.
Rex interjected, getting his words in before Ahsoka could begin to rail at him again. Alpha paused once more, but only for a brief moment before giving a nod.
I know,
he said, before then reaching for a pouch he had mounted on his pauldron and withdrawing something from it.
I'm watching your back. You won't know from where, but I'll be seconds away or less.
Alpha explained to the young commander, handing her a small transponder.
Hide this on your person, somewhere you can easily press, and then, when trouble comes and you need someone to pull your saber out of the fire, use it,
he instructed. Ahsoka hesitated for just a moment before nodding and taking it.
Hopefully I won't need it,
she said as she slid it under her collar.
You will,
Alpha stated without a hint of uncertainty before turning around and departing, stopping for only a moment to tilt his helmet to the side.
Stay sharp, Rex,
he said from over his shoulder.
Always,
the clone captain responded, the elder clone nodding sharply and resuming his departure. Ahsoka followed him with her eyes and a sour expression.
Well, isn't he a bucket full of sunshine?
she said sarcastically once she was sure he was out of earshot.
Wonder if he's burned down any good orphanages lately.
She added, arms crossed as her face filled with lines of frustration.
Well, I'll be sure to ask him his count if the Seps or Imps begin building any.
Rex answered, only half joking, if that much.
Great. You know, I don't know if that gives me hope or makes me hopeless.
Ahsoka said with a shake of her head.
What does?
Asked Rex, and in response, Ahsoka gestured in Alpha's direction.
People like him. They remind me that, no matter what we think, we're not so different from most of the people we fight. And I can't decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
She concluded. Rex wanted to argue, but he knew Alpha 17 far too well to engage in that delusion. Trained by Jango himself, genetically augmented for superior strength and speed, Alpha was the Republic's pale reflection of the super soldiers the Imperium fully endorsed. And what's more, Alpha had been among the first, not the last, to be created. He was not a recent development. He was, in many ways, what Rex was meant to be. And Anakin's current captain could not deny that he was at least somewhat grateful that, in the end, he was ultimately someone and something else, but not entirely. A beeping from Ahsoka's datapad roused them both from their thoughts and dragged their attention back to it.
What's that?
Rex asked, and it took a moment for Ahsoka to answer.
The droid's wide-range proximity sensors have been breached. Something is coming up the road,
Ahsoka said, squinting at the datapad, but not able to make anything out yet.
Whatever it is, the droid is saying that it is more than a couple of people.
Ahsoka added, worry worming into her voice.
Too large to be their delegation?
He asked, and Ahsoka only bit her lip in response and waited. They both crowded around the datapad, watching carefully. The droid who was their eyes was hovering between two Axumite spires, its antenna bobbing, its lensed photoreceptors clicking and sighing metallically as they zoomed in closer. The smoke drifted across the ruined road leading up to the meeting point, just the same as it had before, its gentle black streams flowing from one side to the other as they endeavored to follow the wind. Then, that same guiding wind pulsed and fluctuated, as if disturbed by what was approaching, and by that disturbance, the curtain of ash wavered, pulled back, and revealed what the droid had been sensing. Stepping through the ash and soot borne on the air, the Imperial delegation made itself known. Thick boots crunched metal fragments as the wind around them licked and tossed at the hems of tattered robes and long coats. Bandages, bravery, and burnt steel held shut what should have been felling wounds on each of them, and each of them bearing their own version of a grim expression, with perhaps a single impish exception. Right away, Ahsoka's eyes found a known face, spotting Farnes walking on the far left of the approaching group. The young guardsman looked almost as disheveled as he had when she had pushed him off into the path of his oncoming forces, and she was honestly relieved to see him alive, though shocked to note that he himself would be an actual part of the delegation. Beside him, walking just in front of him, was a woman. A grim-faced Imperial officer who held a thick gun in one hand and wore some kind of massive, sparking gauntlet on her other. Ahsoka could feel her glare even through the screen, and every passionate step she took screamed of a violent, angry desire. Across from them, on the right side, was one of the Imperial droidmen, a female priest of their machine faith who seemed wounded. Not that any of them appeared in anything resembling pristine condition, but the priestess was missing her right arm, leaning on a large axe stave as she made her way across the battlefield for support. Above her head orbited a small flock of those fluttering skull droids the Imperials seemed so fond of, the same devices as Bofin was. Behind her was another young soldier, himself a sort of mirror of the priestess he followed, in that he too was missing an arm, hefting in his remaining right hand an Imperial laser pistol of some kind. He seemed calm, focused, almost as mechanical as the literal cyborg before him. He had thick bandages wrapped around one side of his face, covering one of his eyes in the process, and around his neck hung a broken, burnt chemical mask. Taking up the center back was what Ahsoka assumed to be a space marine, for she wore powered armor and stood taller within it than nearly everyone else in her delegation. In her left hand, she held some kind of long-snouted pistol, which made itself seem odder by the addition of tubes leading into its nozzle and a small tank in its hand grip. In her right hand, she held aloft some kind of fiery-headed mace-like weapon, holding it high like a torch she intended to use to light their way. Her every step was a declaration, her eyes a proclamation of determination. Before her, at the center of them, and walking in the front of their group, was a man who seemed to lead them, and yet was apart from most of them in a very notable way. He seemed to be wearing scorched and torn sackcloth robes under armor that was not at all unlike what Farnes was wearing. The armor of a soldier, of a grunt. His right arm and left leg had been replaced at some point by cybernetics, his skeletal limb replacements among the most distinctive features about him, aside from what he wore on his face and what he carried in his hands. He held high a red banner depicting a veiled, winged woman. She stood before an empty throne, holding a sword and torch as if to protect it from any who may approach. Above and below were golden-stitched words in the Imperial language, making themselves difficult to read in the mild wind which tossed and billowed the banner. On his face was a mask, which, to Ahsoka, appeared to have been crafted from the actual skull of another human. The mask gave her pause, the sight of it sending shivers through her body, but more than that, she noticed how the center of its head seemed to glisten and shine oddly, as if composed of more than just bone. However, the sight that truly made her heart run cold was the sight of those standing just in behind and beside this strange leader of the delegation.
Oh no.
Ahsoka muttered.
What?
Rex asked, and she pointed at the two she had seen before, an enormous man and a small, blue-eyed woman who walked at his side, a skull mask hanging from her hip. The man wore scorched and torn green work fatigues under a long black overcoat which was equally damaged and burnt. Dark pants and dark boots with something like a lightsaber hanging on his belt, though not in his hand. Instead, in his right hand, he held something that looked like a death stick, a tube of something that he was smoking, plumes of blue smoke following in his wake. In his left hand, he was holding some kind of symbol, a stylized red and gold eye, with a skull sitting in the center.
I met that one before. I thought he was a rebel back then, but I guess he was a spy.
The former Jedi explained.
Ah, I see. Well, that shouldn't be too bad then.
Rex said, but Ahsoka shook her head.
No, Rex, I kinda convinced him that I was collecting Imperial heads from the battlefield to eat.
She admitted, feeling her face burn as she did and looking away.
Oh, right. I think I remember this now.
Rex said, laying his helmed face in his hand and shaking his head.
Look, I thought he was a rebel!
Ahsoka blurted out.
Yeah, well, now he's gonna think you're one of those human-eating aliens Farnes was screaming about back in the base.
Rex groaned, and Ahsoka crossed her arms, but could not exactly disagree.
I'll I'll just have to explain to them and hope that that's enough to keep the talks going.
She sighed after a moment.
Come on, we need to get moving,
she said, striding forward toward the rest of the waiting camp around her.
Right,
Rex affirmed, trailing her wake as Ahsoka began to walk alongside the long train of Imperial prisoners they had brought with them, and the clones who stood beside them, guarding them vigilantly. She paused at a portable bacta-tank that they had wheeled out as part of the exchange, the woman within still comatose, her heartbeat faint and slowly growing fainter.
May the Force be with us all,
she whispered softly to the unconscious form of Nerva Sharp, before walking past her and alerting Master Kenobi. It was time.
Hold fast to your faith. Don't let it slip away. Break from these chains. Set free by amazing grace. Brother, won't you take a stand and lead me to that promised land? And sister, won't you shine your light into the darkest night? I've been going to the river, and I've been drinking from the well. I've been on my way to heaven, and I've been fighting through some hell. I've been looking for attention. I've been trying to make a change, asking for forgiveness, learning how to pray through the pain. We're on the way. Holy Spirit in me, remove the veil so I can see. My eyes are lifted up, 'cause I'm covered by the blood. Brother, won't you take a stand and lead me to that promised land? And sister, won't you shine your light into the darkest night? I've been going to the river, and I've been drinking from the well. I've been on my way to heaven, and I've been fighting through some hell. I've been looking for attention. I've been trying to make a change, asking for forgiveness, and learning how to pray through the pain. We're on the way. Tell me when you're ready for me, I'll come running to your glory. Take my heart and hold my hand and lead me to the promised land. Tell me when you're ready for me, I'll come running to your glory. Take my heart and hold my hand, lead me to the promised land.
This world is unsteady, with bombs at the ready, waiting to fight what doesn't exist. We're lost in this madness, we've seen too much sadness, yet people in power still can't resist. It's time for the broken and truth to be spoken. It's never too late, and fight for what is right. We are the night that lasts forever and a day. We bring forth the rain and turn the skies into gray. Now that you see us, you can't run, you can't hide. We are the night that lasts forever and a day. We are meant to lead this revolution. We will write a new found constitution. Shadows speak to me from across that land. Brother, walk with me, let's take a last stand. Wait for me, I won't be much longer. Wait for me, I won't be much longer. We are the night that lasts forever and a day. We bring forth the rain and turn the skies into gray. Now that you see us, you can't run, you can't hide. We are the night that lasts forever and a day. I want to know you are with me. Whenever there's a storm at sea, in a town where lights keep shining, that's where we're gonna be. I wanna know that you are with me. I wanna know that you are with me. 'Cause I want to know, I want to know, I want to know, I want to know. We are the night that lasts forever and a day. We bring forth the rain and turn the skies into gray. Now that you see us, you can't run, you can't hide. We are the night that lasts forever and a day.